So hello, Motivation SIG. I'm here with Dr. Joshua Rosenberg, who is an assistant professor of STEM education at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. His research focuses on how to engage learners to think and learn about data science in science education settings. He's also a highly active researcher who most recently received both an NSF and an NIH grant this August, even during a pandemic. So today we'll be discussing how to navigate the research world during this time. So thank you so much for being here. And I guess we can get started.
Thank you for the chance to talk, and thank you for the kind introduction. I think some people maybe have done more impressive things than their biographies suggest, and others sound best when others are so generous to introduce them in certain ways. So thanks for the way generous introduction.
Of course. So our first question for you is, how has your research changed in light of the COVID-19 pandemic? And that's just a general overall question.
First, I have experience doing data science kind of research. And I think of data science as being characterized by using data that was created for any number of purposes, for the purpose of asking and answering some kind of research question. So sort of using data in a creative, out-of-the-box kind of way. And so a project I started with a number of colleagues was to try to look on US school districts' websites to try to understand broadly their response to the pandemic. So were they closing? Early on, that seemed like a very salient question. Later on, every district, or every school in every district closed. So we turned our attention to trying to understand things like whether devices were provided to students or Wi-Fi hotspots so that they could continue to participate in classes last spring. So that involved web scraping and trying some data science techniques to try to figure out whether we could learn these things just from looking at districts' websites. So that was kind of a new project. And that transition to looking at their posts via Facebook and Twitter, it turns out that that's one of the ways that districts communicated kind of just in the moment with stakeholders. So that was a totally new area, but it drew on some experiences and skills that I had already developed. Basically, keep on doing what you're doing, not because education's not changing, it is. The kinds of questions that we need to ask are definitely evolving. They're different now because of the pandemic. But if we, I think the best way to ask those questions is to extend collaborations, extend studies, extend our theoretical understanding to, in ways that are already aligned. So I think where I've been most successful in adapting to the COVID-19 landscape is sort of building on things I've already done or taking advantage of a study that was already was already undergoing in the case of that experience sampling method survey, rather than trying a whole new area of research. I think that's just hard to do, especially during a pandemic. So my advice to myself is basically keep doing what you have spent time doing, and think about ways where you can contribute, but don't change wholesale to a new area of research in light of the pandemic.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. In line with that, what are some of the recommendations you have for graduate students who are, I guess, the research that they're doing is not quite established yet? And so what about those who are embarking on new research projects, thinking about participant samples, different data collection strategies, or data analyses that you think might be helpful?
Yeah, good question. So in terms of general things, I would say if you're pursuing a dissertation, continue to focus on the things that motivate you, that drive you. Don't feel like you need to shift to a pandemic topic necessarily, but do consider chances to maybe, if you're already collecting data for a study, for a dissertation, think about how the disruptions that the pandemic had brought on might have a bearing on your findings or your questions or your research. But don't feel like you need to change wholesale to a new topic. I think a second thing that comes to mind, this is a little bit different, and this is again pretty general, but I would say as a grad student, you're in this weird position where you are possibly experiencing a stressful situation yourself. You might be having to adapt a class you teach, or you might be having to adapt the things that you're doing as a part of a research assistantship. But at the same time, you might have some chances to adapt what you're doing for example, undergraduate students who might be working on the same project you are, or they might be in a class you teach. And so my advice would be to try to find a way to also extend a little bit of flexibility to those that you are working with as well.
For sure. Thank you. Do you have any resources that you think that have been particularly helpful during this time?
One thing I've really liked, and some students have said they liked, so evidence from someone other than myself, is having a Slack group for my research team. I would say roughly 2/3 of the messages are about research projects. Can you send me a link to this document? Or just checking in, where do things stand with this survey? But a third of the messages have to do with taking bike rides or gardening or random things that one found and wants to share. And that's been really important because not being on campus, I'm a social person in general, but even if you're not, I think you might miss just the chance to talk to people. and so I think having a Slack group has been really helpful. And I encourage others to find ways to kind of communicate outside of email. Speaking of, to communicate outside of email, I think that's been something that's been really helpful. And there's been some learning with that. Like, one thing I'm continually trying myself to do and to encourage students to do is to post messages in channels rather than direct messages to me, because others in the research group can use that as a way to stay kind of apprised of what we're doing. So it's almost like if you're in the office and you just hear others talking about the project, you sort of feel like you're still kind of up to date on it. And so if it's just a message between me and someone else, then others can't really benefit from knowing about the decisions we made or just kind of where things stand with the project. So trying to keep our work kind of public as much as possible within the group has been a helpful thing too.
All right, my next question for you is, what have you learned or changed that will remain a part of your research practice after the pandemic, whenever that comes?
Yeah, whenever that comes. My first thought in response to that good question is that time is really valuable in general. But I think the pandemic has helped me a little bit to maybe at least reflect on how I'm spending my time, because so it's especially when I don't have a full work day, I have to prioritize certain things. Like, for me, it's basically teaching and preparing for a class I'm going to teach, because that's just essential. And then kind of service things that can often be delayed, but sometimes can't. Those have to get done. And then research that has a deadline, that has to get done. So maybe a grant application deadline, or a revision deadline for an article, or a conference proposal deadline. But then, like, everything else becomes hard to find time for, because once you kind of take out the time for that, if you already have a shortened day, I know many find themselves in this situation. You have to choose what to focus on. And so I think something I would take after to the time from now to the time after the pandemic is thinking really hard about how I'm spending my time and what I'm focusing on. I think so it's kind of like experiencing not having enough time to do things has helped me to reevaluate and try to think about what's really important for me to focus on. And I can't say that I've done this. I still spend time learning new methods or trying out new things when I really should be writing up the results of that article and sending it off. So I still do that, but I have this seed planted now of, like, if you have free time, take advantage of that and focus on the most important thing for your research or for your career, or for the public good, whatever you think is most important to do.
Interesting. So speaking with that, how have you navigated kind of working from home and this new lifestyle, you know, trying to, I guess, put boundaries between your work and your home life in one space?
Yeah, it's really hard. I don't have any advice. I really don't. When uh, I think advice to myself might be to try to do less because you need time for the other things. And so you can't do the same amount of work that you were um, hoping to do before the pandemic. You have to do less. I think that um, if you can put like a barrier between work and home, I think that's great. At the same time, there's benefits to being able to catch up on email while you're watching TV with your family or something. And so there's a tension there. Like on the one hand, I think having more of a separation is healthy. But on the other hand, it might be 8 p.m., 9 p.m. when you can finally work if you have a child at home, for example. So it's really a kind of every situation is a little different. I think if people have good strategies that work for them, I would love to hear more of them. But I don't I don't have many. I don't have many apart from uh, try to focus on the important things and try to adapt and um, yeah. Sorry, I think I've said that already, but
No, I think that's helpful. And like, I think there's some truth to the fact that this is new for everyone. So, um, not even the most productive researcher has it all figured out. So,
yeah, none of it. And in my case, and certainly not the most productive, but yeah, I mean, everyone's personality is different as a researcher, and I think um, like advice um, is good to learn from. Like other people's advice about how to work during the pandemic is one experience that you can take things away from. But like I think you said it best. We're all trying to figure out how to adapt in this period, and if you can find something that works for you and it works for you for 2 weeks or 2 months or a year, great, roll with it. But if it works for you for 2 weeks and you have to change to something else, that would be closer to my experience. And I would encourage you to keep on trying to find ways that work as we try to get through a really, 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 really challenging time.
well, thank you so much for all your insight. I think this is really helpful, and I'm sure that your advice will spread and people will benefit from it in some way.
In some way, yeah.
If anything, they will learn to make the best out of, you know, their situations and understand that everyone has their differences.
I'll take that. I think that's I'll stand behind that.